Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event with Volt Portugal, Volt France, and Volt Europe. Tonight, we're welcoming Mateus Carvalho from Volt Portugal, who is running for the municipal election in Lisbon on the 26th of September. We have with us tonight Fabiola Conti and Sven Franck from Volt France. Volt France also held election recently. It was the regional elections, and Fabiola was running as the head of the list in Volt Paris. And we have Reinier van Lanschot, who is Volt Europe as co-president. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us tonight. Maybe Mateus, if you want to start talking about the Portuguese elections, tell us what is Volt Portugal plan.
So thank you first of all for the invitation for the initiative. So in Volt Portugal, we are running for the municipal elections, as you said. They're going to be on September 26th. Basically, it's in the same day as the elections in Germany, as in that Volt Deutschland is running, and also that Volt Austria is running into Austrian cities. So this is a true day for pan-European politics. So we're running in 3 countries at the same time. Only Volt can do that, so that's pretty cool. And here in Portugal, we are running in 3 cities with our own candidates. Basically, in Lisbon, Porto, so the 2 biggest cities in Portugal by the sea, and then also in Tomar, a more smaller city near Lisbon, 1 hour and a half by driving. But also with a very dedicated team, and also where we are presenting for the first time in Portuguese national politics, an Ukrainian head of list to the city hall of a city in Portugal. So this is the first in Portuguese politics, and so we are also proud of that. In Lisbon, we are running actually with 6 lists. So basically, we are running for the city hall and the city assembly, and also in 4 parishes. This actually was quite good because it actually surpassed our expectations. We were only pointing towards 2 parishes, so we were able to double that. And we were able to present 101 candidates in Lisbon alone. And in Porto, we are also running for the city hall. So we are quite excited. It's also big logistics for us. We're still quite small teams. And also our first electoral test in a way. But we think it's going quite well. We're in this timing in which we have the campaign up and running in a way, even though the official period hasn't started yet. But we're still also preparing for September, in which things will really start moving along and getting a more fast pace. And also, we are also running in 2 coalitions. So one is in Coimbra, so a city very known for its university. It's basically a coalition of several parties which are supporting independent movements, a progressive movement called Somos Coimbra. We are Coimbra, and also another one in Oeiras, which is also supporting independent movements, Evoluir Oeiras, which is led by a former environmental journalist, and is basically also trying to really take Oeiras, a nearby city to Lisbon, to basically to try and stop the governing body that has been in power for more than 2 decades, and stop basically the ongoing cycle of just building without having no concern for the environmental cost of it. So this is a very ecologic focused campaign, and we are also very excited to support this. So this is the overall panorama of elections. So 3 cities we are having our own list, and 2 other cities we are presenting with a coalition our candidates as well.
Congrats.
Cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, congratulations. And 151 candidates. That's impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a lot of paperwork.
Yes.
Well, we can imagine.
You had how many? 200?
We had 225 because we are currently in Paris, but I am from Paris. He's from Lille, and we both ran for both municipal election in 2020 with time, and this year, as Robin was pointing out, for regional elections in Île-de-France, so Paris region and Lille region. And bureaucracy also here is very complicated, and we had to gather 225 in Île-de-France.
And
178
in Île-de-France.
Oh wow!
They were residents of the region. And fun bold fact: I was an Italian running for Franco-Italian running for municipal and for regionals. And Sven was the German running for municipal. He couldn't run for regionals, as you know. We don't have that right yet. But he was a German running for both.
I was doing the administration, so I was losing the hair over there, running after everyone.
You see, that was him. But yeah, the numbers sounds extremely impressive.
And it's really pan-European politics in action.
Exactly.
I mean, just the sheer fact that people of double nationality are not only concerned about the politics, but they can participate and are welcome in those pan-European party, and you can be involved both in your country of your origin and the country welcoming you where you're living. That's just amazing.
Yeah, in Lisbon we also had that concern to try to integrate our European voters in our lists. We also we got to present totally gender balanced lists. Only one in one parish, which was very late. We could not fulfill the entire field, but by Portuguese law, our list need to have at least 40% of the smaller gender represented. So by law, you already have to have a lot of representation. And actually, we did also a small campaign in Lisbon to try to mobilize European expats living to register so they could vote. So basically what we discovered is that even though that Europeans and also some non-Europeans like Brazilians, Cape Verdeans, and other countries which have some agreements with Portugal, they could vote in local elections, but for that they need to register. And this is a very little known fact in Portugal. So we could have a very big community voting, but unfortunately, the ones that will register are actually quite few, and the ones who do actually encounter a lot of difficulties when they go to the parish and say, "I want to register to vote," because sometimes they don't even know the right procedures to do that. So we've been actually kind of discovering these dynamics as well, and plan on future elections also to actually kickstart this awareness campaign a bit sooner, because we felt that it had so much potential, and we even got some quite interesting replies and stories. But I think we can really improve here the process, because it's a legal right that we have as European citizens, which are unnecessarily being prevented by these requirements. So it was quite interesting to discover that as well.
I think it's similar in France. I think there's about 2 million EU citizens living in France, and I remember when we did the municipal campaign, 9 out of 10 Europeans we talk to, they don't know they can vote. So for us, actually, if we look to the next European elections in 3 years, this is one of the voter bases we want to build up. We're the European party, so who else to vote if you're voting for more Europe? One of our main strategies will be to try and go after the Germans, the Portuguese, the Italians in France, to say, hey, you actually have someone who can represent you in France and in Portugal and everywhere. So
there's 17 million Europeans who are living in another country from the country they were born in. So that pool is very big. And one thing worth noting as well is that the rules differ a lot per country, sometimes even per region, or sometimes even per local constituency. So plus there is a deadline that's often to register, that's often a couple of weeks in advance. So everybody who's seeing this, thinking to participate in local election, try to find out about these rules at an early stage so that you still have time to run such a campaign. Another thing that's I think worth mentioning is that we once had this very big survey under thousands of voters to learn more about who the average voter is and what motivates them. And what we saw is that one of the defining factors for people to be open and receptive to our message is kind of logical. People who either have made use of the freedom of movement of the EU, or whose parents have made use of the freedom of movement. For example, I was born in France and lived in Paris for the first 3 years of my life. And that's an example of me or my parents, and thus me using the freedom of movement. So this pool of 70 million people is also very likely to be open to what our message is.
Yeah, we actually had recently that discussion actually involved Portugal among members because maybe because we're one of the most pro-European countries in Europe, but for example, I never lived outside Portugal. I joined Volt, and a bit afterwards I went on Erasmus, so not even connected. And this discussion basically came up because we were discussing that people tend to associate or try to associate a lot Erasmus generation and people to Volt. And me and other people will argue that we can reach much more people than that. That's maybe a first base, but it's very limited in the sense that we have a lot of people which are extremely pro-European. They actually, through their work or other stuff, they understand how Europe affects them little by little, and so they can feel European even though they've always lived in the same country. And so we actually tried. In Portugal, we actually try to build a message which doesn't basically sticks us with that label, so we can actually become more inclusive and actually reach more people, you know. But I understand that's our strongest base, you know. But I think we can actually expand much quicker than we sometimes maybe realize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Mateus, what you were saying, we also experience it here, that there are a lot of people that were like, I never lived anywhere else than France, but I do support Europe because I know that I have the possibility. And there are a lot of also the group from the Silver Vault, which is the a little bit more wiser voters. They always say we need to remember that the European Union is the stability also between France and Germany, and so they all stress that point as well. And so you're doing right to have a broader image than the Erasmus one. We have many people that only speak French, that don't even speak in English in both France, and they have the feeling that European Union creates stability, even if it's not their day-to-day life, like it could be for Franco-Italian or a German living abroad. That is absolutely important. And I think that your messages conveys that, because I love the slogan that is, it's not politics, it's future. I think that is just like...
So that slogan was quite debated. It was quite funny because, so we started posting them in Lisbon. They took much longer than expected because the orders got in, the shipment arrived later than we previously wanted. And so we had, instead of just putting them in maybe 1 week or two, we took maybe a month putting all of them. So it was a bit gradual. But it was funny because since the very first beginning, we really understood that it was having an impact, because people were questioning a lot the slogan, and also what the choice, like you are not politicians, you cannot say that. So there was a lot of that discussion. We actually had one of the MPs of the Socialist Party. So this is the party that is in government right now in Portugal, and basically this one is one of the most influential MPs in Parliament in the Socialist Party. He actually criticized our slogans, calling it basically Salazar's propaganda. So he basically tried to equate our slogan to the previous dictator in Portugal. So that was really weird, I would say, polemic, in the sense that it was so far-fetched. But yeah, he's also a bit of a weird MP, actually. But we noticed that it triggered something in people. People either liked a lot, or people got somewhat suspicious. And then we had this like outlier that actually commented this. But so yeah, we noticed that it made some impact, and now we expect to have a second wave of posters now presenting the candidates, some local policies, and that we are working currently.
I think that's also the position of a newcomer who's trying to stir up the entire political spectrum and innovate something that has never been done and do something that has never been done before, to also put out statements that make people think. And someone who's experienced in politics once told me, if nobody hates it, nobody loves it either. So especially as a newcomer, it is good to have slogans that make people think. Because in order to be successful, we also need to change people's minds.
But actually, you're giving me a pretty good ramp for some of the questions that I had prepared for you. Because you talked about all the slogans and the thing that you put in the streets. Actually, I have some French friends from Belgium who went to Portugal and saw Volt's flyers and just like sent me some message like, "Hey, we actually saw the same thing in Paris, in Belgium, and in Portugal. That's amazing." And
that's amazing. I think that it was last week, and I told Victor that it was insane. It looked, first of all, that all my friends were doing holidays in Portugal, and all of them, they were sending me pictures of different locations in the city, saying, "Oh my God, you're here as well." And then I think that, and they were not all French, they were pan-European, and I think that proves once again that it doesn't matter if the slogan is written in Portuguese, that Volt is recognizable, and it really has no borders.
Yes, I even got a message from the mayor candidate from the municipal elections, French guy from the Greens, who went to Germany and said, "Hey, I saw your posters."
Oh, nice.
One, but then it's like, yes, there's about 100,000. I was happy that he said, "Hey, look, I see your stuff." Yes, it does have an impact also beyond our voice bubble.
But that's actually amazing that all those flyers actually have a big impact in other countries. But Mateus, before the call, you actually told me that in Portugal you have some specific regulation concerning online campaigning, which can be a bit of a challenge when you're working in a pan-European organization.
Exactly. So basically, my role right now in the campaign, I'm also a candidate, but my role is basically I'm the responsible for the elaboration of the list, so making sure all the paperwork is done, and also the financial basically the treasurer of the campaign. I'm missing the word. And so basically my concern is always legal stuff all the time. And we have very specific rules both on advertising, and so the way you can apply money into the campaign, and also the timing in which you can do that according to electoral law. And so what I was commenting with Robin before is that, for example, by law, as soon as the elections campaign is set, which in Portugal was extremely late, was only in July that we knew the exact date. But as soon as it was scheduled, all social media advertising gets automatically forbidden for political parties. So we have very specific rules. So in a way, it's good. So it avoids the kind of phenomenon that we've seen in USA of very targeted advertising with political messaging, which is too tailored. But it also creates a lot of challenges to small parties, and especially parties that want to have a very big presence online, because you can never boost a post, you can never do a paid advertising event, because it's very easy to, you just cannot. So that creates challenges. So you need much more organic reach, and you also need to think a bit outside the box and understand what kind of content works and what kind of content does not work. And then also on the streets, we do have a bonus that as political parties, and this is a law that goes back to the times of the 1974 revolution that took us out of the dictatorship. But basically, there's a law that allows us to put outdoors, so any kind of publicity, political publicity, propaganda, on the streets. You can do it anywhere you want as long as public space. So that creates a lot of tension, because basically some of the busiest business centers and even historical centers at this time get full of giant outdoors and giant billboards and all kind of propaganda that gets too intense, because it's literally not regulated, or it's regulated to be wherever you want. So it can be a bit chaotic. For example, our ad candidate, Tiago, for the City Hall in Lisbon, he always has been very firmly against those big billboards that you have, and which are very typical in the political panorama in Portugal. And because it's been very frontal, and we knew that we had very successful cases in Germany and in the Netherlands of smaller posters, that's why we chose this kind of political propaganda. It's smaller, we can repeat it more because it's less expensive, and it gets this more effect of being everywhere, what we're describing. So it was also that factor that made us choose, okay, we will not put any billboards, and we just put posters which are more discreet, and they get the job done of getting the message across.
And I think that they look more like both. They are, like, if we want to call it in a professional way, it's guerrilla marketing, which is like kind of what we are. We don't fit the labels that already exist. And so I think that that's an additional way. It was very smart. But actually, Mateus, I see what you mean about being difficult to advertise, because in France, it's never possible to advertise for a political. Like campaign nor campaign, you can never boost a post on Facebook. You can never do advertising online. Simply advertising, it's forbidden. By the law.
Offline, there's only every city declares places where you can put a poster. So in Lille, 200,000 citizens, there's about 200 poster spots. And that's it.
Yeah.
And there's space for 4 posters. So every day you have to go there and reposter your poster, because after you leave, somebody else comes and puts theirs.
Oh, wow.
But during the night. That's what they do during the night.
Okay. Actually, we had some. So basically, the Socialist Party is in Lisbon. They're running with a smaller left Green Party, more or less like this, and they're running coalition in Lisbon, and they put their posters very similar to ours, also A1 size, but only one-sided. But in some cases, there's actually cases in which they clearly drag down our a photo, and we need a formal complaint. So, but that happens a lot in Portugal. So it's almost every day of the national entity that regulates this to basically receive the complaints between parties and coalitions, because those guys robbed ours, those guys damaged ours. But it's also good because it makes sure that political parties really refrain from doing this kind of like dirty tactics. So it has that benefit, and that's why it's thought. But yeah, that's very interesting. And about guerrilla tactics, actually, sometimes we also discuss that, but actually in Portugal, we had a very recent party that came up last year, which it's a liberal party, so economically and socially liberal. Though they focus a lot very on the economic liberal part, and they actually were able to really shake up the Portuguese landscape because they were able to do outdoors that were very really thought through, even though sometimes it could be a bit sensationalist or very maybe going a bit too far. Basically, they were able to actually posts just from this kind of guerrilla tactics. So they already have that kind of brand or like that idea of like guerrilla tactics is very associated to that party. And now we're seeing actually traditional party candidates trying to imitate that kind of tactics. And it's just funny. We have a lot of memes because of that, actually. So there are some good examples of what not.
Oh, it's good to have a lot of memes.
Yeah.
Actually, Reinier, could you tell us maybe about the elections in the Netherlands? What's your experience?
Yeah, so I will, and I will also tell what Mateus and Fabiola's comments made me think of, because you said, for example, Mateus, that there were ideas from other electoral campaigns of using different types of posters, and it's a lot of these practical examples that are best practices that we are trying to collect. By the way, there's some background noise. Is that annoying for you? No? Oh, okay. And so if try to assess what the most important factors for successful elections are. First, it's creating your narrative and your policy for your local, regional, or national elections. So the narrative and policy creation, and often we use listening tours for that, which I think is a very successful tool because it also creates personal interaction that makes people remind you. Nilifer, our MP in the Dutch Parliament, always says you don't shake the hand of politics, you shake the hand of a politician or an individual. So it's important to have that personal touch as well. So after the narrative and the policies, the ideas that you're trying to bring across, it's volunteers, I will go through it a bit quicker, it's candidates, and especially for local elections, you need a lot of candidates in total for the Dutch local elections in March next year. It was just announced this week that we will participate in them in, if possible, 20 communities, and that will amount to somewhere between 300 and 500 candidates. So you need to train them, you need to make sure that they are elected in the appropriate way. So that's, of course, one element. Then there's fundraising, and then there's the campaign itself, where you use the tool of the guerrilla marketing with different posters. Or an example of what works in the Netherlands, what no party had ever done before, is like using the biodegradable spray paint to mark vaults on places where a lot of people walk. And I think all the best practices from all the different elections we participate in, we have gathered in what is the election hub. And the election hub, the European election hub, is also part of the European expansion team. And so the idea is that we will create an election winning machine, sort of, using all the best practices to ultimately have the biggest impact possible and realize our ideals. So if anybody's watching this and they're thinking, okay, I want to participate with my chapter in elections somewhere next year, then reach out to the election hub, because that's where the best practices are gathered and where you can get the tools and examples of timelines and practical examples of what you can expect and how to go about it. That was a long answer, but not necessarily an answer to your question about the Dutch election. What are you curious about concerning the Dutch election, Robert?
Well, concerning what or everything that we just heard about the political advertisements or the guerrilla marketing, I think you actually started to touch upon that, like your experience on those aspects. But you also already mentioned, for example, taking that biodegradable paints, which it's such a cool idea, and essentially, it's definitely an idea that can go from Netherlands to Portugal.
Actually, just to check on that, we have been debating a lot, and we've started doing that, but it's not so consensual in Lisbon. Like, some members do not like the idea because they think basically it visually gets a bit it ends up being a bit of visual pollution, and so there's some debate about it. So we've started. I'm not sure it's going to be a very intense static. I personally love the idea, and but yeah, we've started. So in a way, sometimes we also have that. So we have the best practices, and we need to see if they work with every electorate. Because sometimes, for example, we notice that the Portuguese electorate tends to be a little bit more conservative than, for example, the German or the Dutch electorates. Not necessarily in terms of policies, but sometimes in the way we communicate or the way we do campaigning. We tend to be a bit more, less open to new ideas, I would say. I would risk saying that. But so to say that we've started doing that. So it's halfway going through.
But guess what? Do you think that in France is legal? Of course it's not. So I see you, but I erase you again. Not legal in France.
And that just shows how there is always differences, and to start with the legal context is very different. I mean, a lot of these tools that we've just mentioned are impossible to use in France. And for example, in France, they have a local electoral system where people get 80 votes, so 80 votes, and then they can divide them among candidates and among lists. So in the past 2 years, a whole world has opened for me with local differences in what democracy is and means in practice. So I think for all the best practices in the election hub, they are not mandatory guidelines. They are more of advice and ideas that you could use and adapt to your local context. Contrary to, for example, our values or the core policies of Volt that you can't deviate from. This is something that is just the means to an end and not the end itself, so that you can adapt easily.
But the electoral hub, I have to say, that are extremely aware of limits in countries. They were very helpful. If you haven't reached out, maybe you have already, Mateus. But
we're in touch. They're very useful.
Yeah, they were extremely helpful. They really I think that the soul of Volt, because I talked to them. First of all, it was a meeting with people from Greece, Poland, a German living in Spain, all over. And they gathered, they put me in touch with, we're running for the Netherlands election from Frankfurt, and we gathered all the information. As you already imagine, half of those things were not possible in France because of legal reasons, but nonetheless, talking to them, we brainstormed new solution that we could find, and how to gather people, how to campaign, how to do things differently. So the election hub is extremely important, and it's a catalysator for, I think, good practices and energy in Volt. And it was for us very helpful. And there's one other thing that you mentioned before, Mateus, that is very interesting from Portugal. That is 40% of the list needs to be from one of the two genders.
Yeah.
And in France, that's actually 50%.
Oh, wow. But for example, how do you do that? Because in our case, the lists are always odd numbers, so you can never have 50.
But that's also possible in France, but it needs to be alternated.
Yeah.
So if you start with a female, the second position needs to be a man, or the other way around.
Okay, ours is only
that's actually what we want to do with Volt everywhere. So there have been a lot of conversations with different local teams that wanted to run for elections but couldn't provide such lists. And depends a bit on the circumstances how we treated it. But I'm in favor of being very strict and say always go for 50-50 gender balance alternation, because that eventually will get us closest to what we want to achieve. I don't think I need to convince you on why that is important. I would always urge each team to do that.
The really interesting thing about that is I have some friends from Volt, some female friends who actually told me I am now running for elections, and I never thought I would be running for elections. I didn't plan on doing so, but because we want to have alternating lists, I basically was asked to, and now I love it. So it's super interesting to see how it actually encourages people who might not think about it, might not think they have the capacity to do so, and who are then actually drawn to it, and now they actually want to do more.
The same thing happened to me in Milan. So Milano in Italy, they did exactly what Reinier was saying. They were like, we want to run with alternative lists because either we are facts or we're just talking. And but as everywhere in politics, so women are fewer representation because of historic reasons that, again, we're not here to discuss. But so I convinced I talked to some friends because I'm originally from there. And I got the same response that Roland was saying. So they were like, oh, that's cool. I'll try to find out. And now they are actively campaigning, and they didn't think that they will love it so much because they're like, oh, again, to go back to the slogan, it's like, this is not politics, this is future, because we are fast forward in a more equal society, a greener one. And so same friends never thought of doing that.
One of our concerns in that, so as I was saying, our lists, with the exception of one parish, are all gender parity, all gender parity. The other one is the 40%, basically, which is a requirement law. But in terms of, because we were, also not only because of that, and because most of our heads of lists are men, which was unfortunate, but it was the people that decided to start a list. And unfortunately, we cannot have more women doing that. Something we are having the concern to do is that, for example, the next posters we're going to have are going to always have the number 2 and number 1, number 2, in order to always show our gender balance leadership. So we always have, okay, if you don't have the exactly the same thing you want, at least we're going to try to project with the kind of feature that we need. And so our posters here in September are being designed that way. And we always try to do that exactly to try to show, if you have more female leadership, which in politics, which in Portugal we lack, they also are in minority as in the entire European continent. We need to show that there are cases of female leadership, and this also fosters more, right? So we do have that concern, and are trying to do that in every step of our communication plan.
And I feel that does have an impact, because when we put together our poster for regional elections, generally you only see one face, and that's it. What we did in Ile-de-France is that basically a region is composed by districts, départements, and we had head of departments, and we had 8 of them. 5 were women, 3 were male, and we wanted to underline that. Even if by law you have to have a alternation, we had more female, and we put that forward. And so there was the bigger circle, it was my face, because I was running the coalition, but then underneath there were 7 circles where there were 4 women and 3 men. And like a lot of people were like, oh my god, that, first of all, it's not just one person, it's a group of people. And so it created like grassroots citizen movement, and they were more female than male. It was the only poster that had that, and that was like, people do notice. So done on the communication Mateus. So
it was the same in our region. We also had a poster where we put 6 or 7 people, because we said we're a team of, we're not this the classic single candidacy French thing. I remember every time you hang a poster and you start to discuss with people, they say, "Oh, why is it not one person?" But because it's not a one-person show. It's a team, and we try to show this. And there was a lot of positive feedback on it. So I think it's really important.
Okay, cool. I was meant to ask, if you don't mind, Robert, to ask you guys. In your municipal elections, what kind of topics do you felt that were more pressing during the time of your campaign? So what were like those topics that people were always asking? Was like housing, like what kind of topics were your flagship policies?
I think that so in France there is a specific competition. How do you say that? There's specific rules for who does what. So the city is responsible, for example, for elementary school. The département, the higher level, which is the province, is responsible for college. And then the region is responsible for high school, which is, if you ask me, doesn't make much sense. But so also all the questions and the policy had to be redirected according to that thing. But in regional elections, what we tried to do, there were always people asking, "Oh, what is your number one priority? What are you going to do if you're elected?" And then I'm like, people, we're talking about a list of 250 people. Do you think that a council has only one priority? It's like we have several, and ours are 1, 2, 3. And so we're trying to type all the things that the region was supposed to do in all the values that that Volt had. So the pressing issue for the regional election was, for example, transports. Transports, especially in Paris, they're crazy, but they're not responsibility of the city, they're responsibility of the region.
Okay, that's interesting. So, it's interesting because in Lisbon we actually have the opposite debate. So most of the transportations are the local municipalities, so the city that owns it, except the subway maybe, which is the national level. But there's a lot of talk about having the metropolitan area, which it is a body that assembles the presidents of all the cities in Lisbon and surrounding. But to start to have that kind of management of transportation in the metropolitan area, because, for example, you all know Lisbon near the river of Tagus River, but the south of that river, we call it the south margin, has huge amounts of people that every day commute to the city. So there's a really big need of thinking the infrastructure at the metropolitan area. So but we are not there yet. So we don't have a lot that kind of debate, still very focused on the city, which ends up sometimes to be a little bit narrow-minded in a sense.
It's the same. It's in Paris. It was exactly the same because Île-de-France is the region of Paris, but everybody talks about just Paris. And one of our points is to decentralize Paris. And we have in transport, for example, there are some départements around Paris that are deserved. Like there's no infrastructure. And our idea, it was like, how do you think that these people have the same chances, or is there an equal thing? If they don't, they have to take the car to get to a metro station, to get to a train, and to get to a metro station. And I'm like, first of all, you're polluting because they need to have a car. So you're not reducing the green consumption. And second, you're not creating equal chances. And we saw that this, we called it the creation of different centers. So the decentralization of Paris, also because Paris is so big, it can't handle that many people. So at one point, if you keep on pushing people, it will implode. We saw that resonated with people. So it kind of creates the same thing that Lisbon has. I don't know if in Lille you had
for the municipal elections in Lille, we ran in a coalition with the Green Party. We lost by 200 votes, so it was actually quite close. Our main topics one of our main things was also this. Lille has 15 boroughs or parishes, and we also want to, even already in Lille, to make it more small hubs with infrastructure there to really, to to stop people having to move from A to B. And the main thing for us was urbanism, because Lille it's too much construction and there's absolutely no green space. I think I forgot the statistics, but in France it's one of the cities with the least green space. It's one of the most polluted cities in terms of traffic, and there's also no sign of it slowing down. So this was our main ticket item, was to have a more sustainable way of living in the city. So less traffic, less office construction, more living construction, and also we call it apaisement, so appeasing of the quartier. So to make the quartiers more livable, because a quartier is a big parking spot, which on Sunday is a marketplace, and besides that, that's it. That's the quartier. So
okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it shows to me effective listening tours can be very big as well, because it can show you what exactly is going on in the hearts and the minds of people living in a city or a village. 2 weeks ago, I went on a listening tour as preparation for the local elections in Amsterdam, where I live. And one of the things that surprised me, that one of the recurring themes that people brought up was that their biggest concern in the neighborhood was the fact that there was a lot of garbage on the street. It's such a kind of an obvious thing, but still, I wouldn't have thought of it if I would draft the policies for the local elections by myself. So I think that's an example of the importance of listening to it, that will also give insight in these mobility problems that you've just discussed. Another thing that I wanted to say is the fact that we lost by 200 votes in Lille is, for me, an example that I use of how important each vote is. Each vote counts. Also, in Germany, we've had an election where we participated, where we got 0.99958% of the votes or something. Why does that matter? Because after 1%, that region gives you, for the coming 4 years, subsidies to develop your political party. So that was also like a change of 2 votes. Eventually, we appealed, and they said, okay, it's so close to 1%, we'll consider it 1%. But those 2 examples, when people ask me, like, why should I vote, does it even matter?
Especially in France. In France, in municipal elections, the winner gets all. So the winner gets half of the seats and his percentage. So if you win the election, you more or less have 75% of the seats, and then you give like 2 or 3 to the opposition, and you can just sit there and have nothing to do in the office.
Okay, no, in Lisbon it's proportional. It's with the on system.
Like everywhere.
But actually it's very funny that Reinier was mentioning that, because 2 weeks ago, we did also listening tour in my neighborhood in Alvalade. It's a parish where we're going to run. It's Antonio Souza, one of our members, who decided that we should run here as well. And that was also a topic that was very brought up. And actually, it's funny because Tiago and Miguel, so our heads of list for the City Hall and the City Assembly, they're very concerned with the public space. So Tiago, I've known him for 3 years, and for years that we are signatures, we are talking with people. If there's nothing to do, he sometimes collects garbage that he sees on the street. So he has a very focused mindset on the public areas that are shared, and we should all take care of them. And Miguel also as well, but much more about accessibility. So one of our flagship is one that sometimes is not the sexiest to many people, but it's super vital, which is accessibility in our sidewalks. So if you've been in Lisbon, our sidewalks are like worldwide famous because they are so worked through, but they are terrible in terms of accessibility. And in most streets, they don't even allow you to basically walk on it. Sometimes you need to go on the actually road, especially if you are in a wheelchair, if you have a baby, it's absolutely terrible. So we've been focusing a lot on how do you build actually walkable sidewalks, which might seem a little bit weird, but it's so fundamental. Even recently, we've had areas in Lisbon which have been reconstructed, so they've been they redone the parking, they have redone the sidewalk, and they are still like 50 centimeters long, with a lamp in the midway. So a person on a wheelchair could never walk it through. So that's one of the topics our candidates are really apologetically vocal about. And also about the way we can connect the city through cycle lanes. So in Lisbon recently, we've developed a lot the number of cycle lanes, and the center is starting to be a bit more robust. But again, if you go to the neighboring cities or neighboring neighborhoods, they are very disconnected. And sometimes distance that you could do in half an hour or 15 minutes by bike, you just cannot do because you need to go through motorways, which are totally impossible for bicycles. So we're actually proposing to do what we're calling fast cycle lanes to connect the neighboring cities, so that those we actually are fan of going of commuting by bike can do so, because right now we have more and more cycle lanes, but they do not connect and they do not allow commuting properly. So we're also focusing a lot on that, and it's funny because they're always the same issues. So
it's the same issue.
Are always the same.
It's the same issue indeed.
But
exactly.
It's actually there that European cooperation can help, because I think maybe Volt Nederland can give you a bit of a hand when it comes to cycling and biking lane. I just remember going from Leiden to The Hague, just cycling. It's very practical when you have bike lanes connecting to two cities. But I think we are reaching the end of our event, as some of you have to go. Ironically, some of you actually have meetings for elections, so we would not want to prevent that from happening. So thank you very much to all of you for coming. Maybe Mateus, you want to remind us the dates of the elections?
Yeah. So September 26th. So call your Portuguese friends that you have wherever, or European friends living in Lisbon, and call them to vote Volt.
Vote Volt.
Vote Volt. Exactly.
Good. And thank you very much to everyone for coming and for this event. It was lovely talking to all of you, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you everyone so much. Thank you for the conversation.
Goodbye.
Bye.